The ridge was gone, not in the slow, grinding way that battle lines erode, but in the sudden collapse of a wave smashing through a sandcastle. Enemy armor had poured over it like steel locusts, their treads chewing the earth into ragged scars. From a command post of Forward Operating Base Redemption, Major Thaddeus Blackwood stared through binoculars at the valley below. Heat shimmer turned the distance into a wavering mirage, but the reality was clear enough. Dust plumes marked the approach of a mechanized column, the kind of force that didn't come to negotiate. "Sir," Lieutenant Zendaya Wright's voice broke the stillness. She slid a series of satellite images onto the tactical table between them. Her usual confidence had been replaced with a clipped, almost surgical precision. Latest recon confirms at least 16 T-90V units advancing on the eastern approach. New variants, armor reinforcement, and reactive plating. Blackwood didn't answer immediately. His knuckles whitened against the rubber grips of the binoculars. 3 weeks ago, Operation Steadfast Shield had been sold as a light-footprint peacekeeping mission. Hold the border, fly the flag, deter skirmishes. But that was before the enemy unveiled a capability no one in intelligence had seen coming. A full-spectrum electronic warfare net that could jam comms, scramble targeting, and ground Allied aircraft for miles. And our air support? Blackwood asked, though the answer was already a stone in his gut. "Still grounded, sir," Wright confirmed. "Their anti-air coverage extends well past our position. Nothing gets in or out." Around them, the command post thrummed with tension. Communication techs hunched over consoles, trying to punch through the jamming. Tactical officers dragged icons across digital maps as new enemy sightings came in. Medics quietly inventoried stretchers and triage supplies. In the far corner, technical specialist Alara Frost sat alone at her communication station, headphones resting around her neck. Her fingers moved with effortless precision over her keyboard. She'd arrived with the last personnel rotation, a ghost among soldiers. No banter, no card games, no customization on her uniform. Most people barely notice her. Captain Riker, the operations officer, approached with a tablet. Small arms at 60%, heavy weapons at 40%, and the resupply convoy. Blackwood's jaw tensed. The convoy, ambushed 5 miles from the base. 12 soldiers dead, critical supplies lost. The enemy's move had been as deliberate as it was lethal. "They've cut us off completely," Blackwood finished for him. He straightened and called for all platoon leaders. When they gathered, the weight in his voice left no illusions. "We are facing a superior force in numbers, technology, and positioning. They've severed supply lines, crippled our communications, and grounded our air. Their advanced patterns show detailed knowledge of our defenses. Intelligence believes they're field-testing new EW systems built to counter our entire playbook." Silence fell, the kind of silence that carried questions no one dared ask. "Sir," Lieutenant Ashford finally spoke, "are we being left out here?" "Command is aware," Blackwood said carefully. "Extraction isn't possible under current countermeasures. That leaves us one option: tactical withdrawal. We move at dusk. Only essential personnel and equipment. 2 fallback positions." As he pointed to the map, Frost's voice cut through, soft but certain. "There's a vulnerability in their advance we could exploit." Heads turned toward her. She stood, crossing to the display. "Their EW systems cycling missions. There's a brief window." "Stick to comms, specialist," Riker interrupted, waving her back. "Let the combat officers handle tactics." Frost didn't argue. She returned to her station, her expression unreadable. When the officers dispersed to prepare their units, Wright lingered. "Sir," she said quietly, "there's something wrong with Frost's file. It lists her last posting with the 4th Siege Battalion at Fort Gordon. I called in a favor. They've never heard of her." "Could be classified," Blackwood said, though his tone carried doubt. "That's not all," Wright pressed. "I've caught her on frequencies outside our approved bands. Twice." Before he could reply, alarm screamed through the base. A communications operator rushed over. "Outpost Charlie is under assault. Infantry breach inside the wire." The room erupted into motion. Orders shouted, boots pounding on metal decking. the air filled with the distant thump of artillery and the sharper crack of incoming rounds. Through it all, Frost remained seated, calmly packing her comms kit into a hard case. Wright moved toward her. "Who are you really?" she demanded. "Your file's a ghost. Your frequencies aren't ours. Talk to me." Frost looked up, eyes steady. "Would it matter?" "It matters to the people whose lives depend on knowing who's in this fight." Something flickered in Frost's gaze, something hard in the quiet tech persona she'd worn for weeks. Before she could answer, a shell impact rattled the building, dust sifting down from the rafters. Blackwood's voice cut in over the comm net. "All units, execute evacuation plan Delta. This is not a drill." And that was when Frost made her choice. She reached beneath the tangle of standard-issue gear and pulled out a compact, unmarked device, unlike anything in NATO's inventory. Wright's hand hovered near her sidearm. "What is that?" Frost didn't answer. She pressed a recessed switch, lifted the mic, and spoke 3 words in a voice that carried the weight of command. "Zero Horizon active." The first thing they felt was the air change. Even before the sound arrived, a low pressure rolled over the base like a weather front, ruffling tarps and shivering the loose edges of map sheets. Then the roar came, ragged, rising, unmistakable. Twin fans screaming like angry gods. A tens. Negative. The air controller blurred automatically, as if saying could undo reality. No birds in stack. They can't. They could. They were here. Blackwood was already at the observation slit, binoculars up, knuckles whitening. The valley erupted in punctuation, lances of fire raking across the lead enemy tank. Tungsten rounds chiseling armor plate into confetti. The T-90V at the point of the column bucked once, twice, then blossomed into a dirty orange flower. The shockwave slapped the ridge a heartbeat later. "Strafe pattern scythe," someone whispered, not meaning to. The second Warthog knife along the ridgeline, low enough to clip cloud ghosts, and stitched a walking string of impacts along the infantry's overwatch trench. Men scattered like startled ants. The Warthogs rolled, flattening into a turn that should have been suicidal inside a dense anti-air envelope. Except the envelope wasn't behaving like an envelope anymore. "Where's the missile fire?" Captain Riker barked. "Where's the—" On cue, a pair of enemy launchers spat hungry streaks skyward, then stuttered, hiccuped, and died. Their guidance lights flickered like bad wiring. The missiles corkscrewed harmlessly into the hills, detonating as if embarrassed. "Impossible," said the air controller, voice small now. Across the valley, the A-10s worked with methodical fury, carving the assault force into segments, severing each piece from the next. It wasn't random violence. It was surgery. Armor went first, then mobile EW vans, then the power nodes for the anti-air grid. Every pass was a thesis defended with gunfire. Inside the command post, the map sprang to life. Icons that had been frozen by jamming began to crawl and reposition, updating faster than the text could call out the changes. Channels long dead cleared like thawing rivers. Blackwood lowered his binoculars slowly, as though returning from a dream. He looked at Frost. Her posture had shifted by inches, but those inches changed everything. The deferential curve of the shoulders was gone. She stood like someone accustomed to being heard. "Who are you?" Blackwood asked, each word carefully unloaded, like handling a live round. Wright arrived at his shoulder, eyes on Frost, hand nowhere near her weapon now. "Zero Horizon," she said, quiet but certain. The name landed like a secret spoken in church. "I thought it was a rumor." Frost's gaze flicked to Wright. A small nod, the acknowledgement of someone who expected to be recognized by code, not by face. "Rumors are useful armor," she said. She set the compact device onto the table with ceremonial care, a relic placed on an altar. "Major Alara Frost. Zero Horizon. Forward operations, Valkyrie Cell." Captain Riker's tablet slipped in his grip, clipped the edge of the table, clattered to the floor. He didn't pick it up. Blackwood's mouth opened, closed, recalibrated. "Major?" "Commission predates yours by 4 years," Frost replied evenly. "We embedded 3 weeks ago when indicators suggested an enemy systems trial. This location is an ideal choke point, and a reliable telemetry corridor. You were designated strategically consequential. Bait, Riker said, recovering speech the way a man recovers a weapon. We were bait. You were necessary, Frost corrected. Bait implies you were expendable. You were never that. The Warthogs rolled in again. The GAU, 8 cannons chatter slashed the sky, a chainsaw through sheet metal. Downrange, the enemy column finally broke, vehicles swerving for cover that didn't exist. EW vans tried to reposition. One erupted mid-maneuver, as if its circuits had decided to self-immolate. How are they flying? The air controller demanded, half awe, half accusation. Their grid still up. I'm reading emissions. Not up, Frost said, confused. She tapped her unmarked device. We induced signal rod in their uplink path, bent a handshake, spoofed health checks. Their missiles are asking the wrong questions and getting comforting answers. Right exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. You ghosted their sky. Something like that. Frost allowed. The details are need to know and you do not, at present, need to know. Blackwood forces focus back to the practical. What else can you bring to bear? Tasking for 2 additional airframes en route. Drone package orbiting to finish movers. We have a narrow window before they hard switch to fiber fallback. We use it to make this feel like a natural disaster, not a targeted strike. Riker found his tablet and something like defiance. You let our convoy get hit. Frost didn't flinch. We suspected they'd roll out the full suite only if they believed we were blind. Confirming the payload required overreach. Your convoy was the pressure they couldn't resist applying. 12 soldiers, Riker said, voice cracking on the count. They weren't pressure. They were people. Frost's expression didn't change, but the voice softened by a micron. And because of them, 2 corps worth of soldiers won't walk into a system we didn't understand. I don't expect forgiveness. I expect you to weigh the math the way command is forced to, if it helps. And I know it doesn't. We had a QRF staged. Their net closed too fast. Riker's anger looked for purchase and couldn't find enough. He stepped back, like someone retreating from a cliff he hadn't realized he was standing on. Comms. A specialist called across the room, as if remembering his job. New channel opening. Priority signal. Encryption marker. I've never seen this. You have, Frost said, already moving. You just didn't know it had a name. She leaned over his shoulder, keyed in an authorization string with the familiarity of a locker combination. The net parted. A voice filled the room, clipped and controlled. Valkyrie Actual, this is Overlord. Status. Overlord, Valkyrie Actual, Frost replied, hands light on the console. Package exposed. Countermeasure successful. Enemy testbed neutralized. We are holding. Copy. Containment team inbound. ETA 90 minutes. Maintain posture. Limit exposure. Understood. We'll keep it noisy and normal. The line clicked off. Blackwood stared at the dead air as if it might still explain itself. Then turned back to Frost. You embedded to watch. To count their teeth before they bit. To make sure they bit where we could control the damage. Frost said, this ridge, it was going to fall no matter what you did. I kept you on the map long enough to turn their trial into a confession. You kept us in the dark, Blackwood said, not accusing so much as naming the weather. We could have coordinated. We could have. You would have tried to save the convoy, Frost said gently. You would have redirected patrols, shifted signatures. You would have changed the variables I needed to remain constant. And then when the rail hit came somewhere else, at a scale you can't picture on this map, you would have asked why intelligence had failed to anticipate it. Silence again, not quite as heavy as the first. The room's noise seeped back and around it. The hum of servers, the staccato of typing, the distant, percussive laughter of the cannon. Wright stepped closer to Frost, curious despite herself. How many posts like ours are? Strategically consequential? Fewer than you'd hope, Frost said. More than you'd like. Is there always a Yutham? Wright pressed. A Valkyrie? Frost's mouth tilted. Not quite a smile. You'd be surprised where we sit. A ripple of cheers swelled at the far end of the room as the last remaining tank on the enemy's flank shuddered. tried to reverse, and then folded inward, power plant cracking like a walnut. On the map, red icons dimmed or went gray, the system's way of saying done, done, done. Blackwood let the applause wash over him and then raised a hand. It quieted more from habit than authority. He looked at the faces he knew. The platoon leaders, the techs, right? And then at the face, he did not. Not really, not until now. All right, he said, anchoring himself in action. We use their panic. Fire support. Push suppressive on the western draw. They'll try to egress there. Engineers, prep obstacles on fallback 1. But keep the lane open for our own movement. Medics, triage station in the North Bay. And somebody get me a casualty update from Outpost Charlie. Orders moved like current, animating limbs. The base felt different now. The same skeleton, a new pulse. Frost keyed new tasking into her device. Wholly at ease at the center of the storm she conjured. Your people are good, she said without looking up. You've trained them to pivot without losing cohesion. That's rarer than you think. Flattery, Blackwood said. Is that in the manual? It's in the part about keeping commanders functional when their operating picture explodes, Frost answered. You're allowed to process after we win. After? Blackwood echoed, not sure if he believed she meant today or in general. In the long sense, Frost said. Then business again. Overlord wants the enemy's EW van intact if possible. If we can push a recovery team under drone cover, we take it. If not, we cook it. No half measures. Wright was already a step ahead. I'll build a corridor. We can mask under the UAV noise floor for about 2 minutes before they realize the pattern's artificial. Frost glanced at her. Approval flickered. Quick, private. Do it. They worked. They stole a van out from under a collapsing enemy perimeter like thieves robbing a burning house. They bagged drives, tagged emitters, pulled racks with the tenderness of organ harvesters. When a counterattack finally probed their flank, the Warthog swung low one last time, snarled, and left a warning scorched into the earth. 90 minutes later, the thump-thump of rotor blades announced the containment team. Matte gray birds settled beyond the wire, disgorging people in gear without insignia, the kind of professionals who made soldiers stand a little straighter, without knowing why. The newcomers moved with purpose born of repetition. This wasn't their first battlefield turned classroom. As they took custody of the prize, Frost's posture eased by degrees. The device at her elbow dimmed, the way a pilot light lowers when the stove's off. For the first time since the roar had rolled in, she seemed remotely human tired. Blackwood stepped beside her. I owe you an apology, he said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. I should have listened when you saw the pattern. I dismissed you. Frost studied him, weighing the shape of the apology. You behaved exactly as you should have, given what you were told, she said. The experiment fails if the variables know their variables. He huffed a laugh that wasn't quite one. That's supposed to make me feel better? No, a beat. It's supposed to make you feel necessary. Across the room, Wright looked up from a terminal where she had permission she hadn't had an hour ago. Redacted reports marched past like ghosts. In photo after photo, a woman stood in the background wearing different names, sometimes a private's patch, sometimes a captain's bars, always the same eyes. How long have you been doing this? Wright asked softly, not sure she wanted to know. Long enough to know the right time to speak is usually 3 seconds after everyone decides there's no time left, Frost said. Long enough to know it never gets easier. Not if you're doing it right. The last enemy icon winked off the map. Outside, smoke hung over the valley like a scrim dragged across the stage after the final line. Overlord came back on the net. Valkyrie Actual confirmed handoff complete. Handoff complete, Frost answered. Site stable. Allies intact. Copy. Exfil window to follow. Stand by for further. The line went dead again, leaving the ordinary chatter victory in its place. Inventory calls, casualty reports, the hush around names that wouldn't answer. The ridge was still lost, but the story had been rewritten in the telling. What was supposed to be a route had become a lesson, and the teacher had finally signed the blackboard. Blackwood looked at the valley, then at Frost. So what are you really? He asked, somewhere between wonder and wariness. A trigger? A guardian angel? A bad secret with good timing. Frost considered, then shook her head. None of those, she said. I'm a reminder. Of what? That the war you see is only the part of the picture your clearance lets you look at. She picked up the unmarked device, slid it back into the fold of her kit, and that sometimes the only way to win is to let the enemy believe they already have. She turned to go as the containment team leader approached, offering a crisp nod Blackwood wasn't sure he'd earned. Wright fell into step beside Frost, curiosity blazing but tempered now with respect. What happens next? Wright asked. Frost's answer landed like the promise of another storm. Next, she said, we stopped pretending this was a one-off. The battlefield lay hushed beneath a heavy quilt of smoke. It was the kind of silence that made you hear your own breathing, the kind that came only after fight had burned itself out. From the observation deck, Major Blackwood scanned the valley where hours earlier enemy armor had crawled toward them like an iron tide. Now it was littered with the carcasses of tanks, plumes of oil smoke drifting skyward like accusations. The A-10s were gone, silent as ghosts, but their work had been carved into the earth. The ridge was still lost. That part hadn't changed, but the manner of the loss had. The official record, when it came, would say the enemy had been repelled long enough for an orderly withdrawal. It would not mention the unmarked device, the coded phrase, or the program whose name still tasted like classified ink. Zero Horizon. Inside the command center, the temperature had shifted from panic to something more brittle. Troops moved with mechanical efficiency, packing, cataloging, double-checking gear. Medics worked their way through the triage bays, marking tags. The dead were carried to the temporary morgue in the supply tent, each one zipped into olive green anonymity. Overlord's last transmission still hung in Blackwood's mind. Maintain posture. Limit exposure. Containment teams were en route. Faceless operators in gear with no insignia. They would take custody of whatever Frost had stolen from the wreckage of the enemy EW vans. Then they'd vanish, along with her, and Blackwood would be left to write a report full of blanks. Wright found him at the map table, the glow of the digital terrain model painting her features in cold light. They're saying containment's 20 minutes out, she reported. Perimeter teams will hold for them. Enemies retreating in pieces. No sign of regrouping. Blackwood nodded. Good. I want our people moving the minute the handoff's done. Wright hesitated. Sir, I dug deeper into Frost's record, past the fake Fort Gordon posting. Fake. Blackwood's brow arched. Fabricated is a polite word, Wright said. Whoever wrote her file built it from scrap, bits of real units, made up deployments. But when I cross-checked old operation logs, she was there, not in the foreground, always peripheral. Different name every time, different rank, and always when things turned. She slid a tablet across the table. Blackwood swiped through photographs. Grainy stills from combat zones around the world. In each one, there she was, sometimes a comms corporal, sometimes a logistics lieutenant, once even in civilian clothes, but always the same sharp eyes, always just outside the spotlight. How far back, he asked. 15 years, at least, Wright said. I stopped when I hit redactions thicker than my clearance. Blackwood studied the images. Ghost work, he murmured. More like Ghost Command, Wright replied. And I think she prefers it that way. Frost herself stood at the far end of the room, speaking in low tones to one of the incoming containment officers, a tall man in slate-gray body armor, face half hidden by a visor. Their words didn't carry, but the body language spoke of old familiarity, not deference. She handed over a hardened case, the kind used for nuclear trigger mechanisms, and signed something on a glass pad. The officer took it without comment, snapped a lock on the case, and walked out without a backward glance. When she rejoined Blackwood and Wright, Frost's voice was matter-of-fact. Package is secure. Containment will sanitize the site. Your unit will move to fallback point 2 as planned. Once you're clear, I'm on the next outbound bird. That's it. Blackwood asked. You just disappear? Frost's gaze didn't waver. Zero Horizon assets never remain in place after activation. We're ghosts, not garrisons. Wright folded her arms. And the people here? The ones who fought beside you without knowing who you were. They'll be debriefed, Frost said. Commendations will be written. The official narrative will be tidy. And none of them will be targeted by the enemy for what happened here. That's the point. That's the cover, Wright corrected. That's survival, Frost countered. Later, when the last pallets were loaded and the last of the containment operators vanished into the sky, Blackwood found Frost alone by the wire. The horizon glowed faintly with the fires in the valley. I owe you something, he said. You owe me nothing. I dismissed you when you saw the gap in their EW cycle. I was wrong. You reacted exactly as you should have, she replied. Zero Horizon works because we don't distort the command environment. If I'd been treated differently, it would have compromised the operation. Still, Blackwood said, lives might have been saved. Her eyes softened just enough to register as human, or lost elsewhere. You can't know. Neither can I. That's the cruelty of strategy. They stood in silence, the distant crackle of burning fuel, the only sound. A year later, Washington in late autumn was all gray sky and sharper wind. Blackwood, now lieutenant colonel, sat in a nondescript coffee shop in a government district, nursing a cup that had long since gone lukewarm. The message that brought him here had contained nothing but encrypted coordinates. The signature pattern had been unmistakable. The door opened. A woman entered, dressed in civilian business attire. Hair shorter now, darker. Glasses. She scanned the room, spotted him, and smiled in that small, self-contained way he remembered. Colonel Blackwood, she said as she sat at A. Or should I call you Lieutenant Colonel now? He smiled faintly. You're looking well, Dr. Finch. Today, she agreed. Tomorrow I might be someone else. She took a sip of coffee. Congratulations on the promotion. Your task force has been effective. You know exactly how effective, he said. The EW program we crippled that day is still limping. That was the objective. She set down her cup. And now I have a new one for you. The clink of ceramic and the low murmur of lunchtime conversations filled the air, but to Blackwood it felt like background noise from another world. Across from him, Alara Frost, today wearing the name Dr. Eleanor Finch, stirred her coffee as if they were two colleagues catching up after long absence. I doubt you called me here to reminisce, Blackwood said, leaning forward. You've never been the sentimental type. Frost's lips quirked, perceptive as ever. And correct, this is business. Blackwood took a sip of his own coffee, buying himself a moment. A year had passed since forward operating base redemption, but seeing her again was like stepping back into that command post. Only now the battlefield was a quiet cafe, and the weapon in play was conversation. You remember redemption, Frost began. Not a question. Hard to forget, Blackwood replied. Your intervention saved the base, and your disappearance afterward made sure half my command thought you were a hallucination. They weren't far off, Frost said, almost smiling. Zero Horizon works best when our existence isn't entirely believed. Then why meet with me now? Because the rules are changing. She set her spoon down, her eyes locking onto his. Your task force has been effective in implementing countermeasures derived from the intelligence at redemption. But our analysts believe the enemy has advanced further than we anticipated. They're developing a new generation of EW systems. Systems we haven't yet observed under combat conditions. Blackwood set his cup down carefully. You need another bait operation. Not quite. Frost's voice lowered. We need a joint operation. A controlled exposure where Zero Horizon works alongside conventional forces. Openly, at least to the commanding officer. We'd still operate under deep cover. But this time, you'd know we were there from the start. That's a departure from your standard playbook. Blackwood said. The threat warrants it, she replied. The enemy has learned from redemption. Their next deployment will be sharper, more adaptive. To catch it, we need a unit that can integrate live intelligence from a Zero Horizon asset without losing cohesion. And you decided my task force fits that bill? I recommended you personally, Frost said without hesitation. At redemption, you adapted in real time, without letting ego or resentment compromise the mission. Most commanders, when discovering they've been kept in the dark, Either grab for control or shut down. You did neither. You processed the new information and acted. Blackwood gave a dry smile. I had good motivation. The base was about to be overrun. And that's precisely the point. You prioritize a mission over yourself. That's rare. A server appeared to clear the table next to them. Frost fell silent until he left. When she spoke again, her voice carried a sharper edge. We call this new assignment Operation Obsidian Shield. On paper, it will be a field test for next-gen electronic countermeasures in contested territory. In reality, it's bait for their new system. We'll give them just enough to think they're winning. Then we take their playbook apart. Blackwood's brow furrowed. And the Zero Horizon asset? I assume that's classified. It is. You'll meet them in theater, under their cover identity. She slid a small matte black data drive across the table. Full operational outline. Review it with your XO only. Blackwood tapped the drive, but didn't take it yet. And if I say no, then the mission goes to someone else, Frost said simply. And you'll lie awake wondering whether they're capable of handling it. He chuckled without humor. You're good at pushing buttons. That's my job. She leaned back. This isn't about trust, Colonel. It's about capability. You already know the battlefield has layers most officers never see. I'm inviting you into one of them. For a moment, they simply regarded each other, the way soldiers measure a line before stepping over it. Finally, Blackwood picked up the drive and pocketed it. If I agree, will I be working with you again? Frost's answer was smooth, deliberate. That information isn't in the briefing. Of course not, Blackwood said. But if it is you, I'll know. She stood, buttoning her coat. Colonel Blackwood, what happened at Redemption prevented 3 major offensives. You won't see those victories in any report. You'll just know they never happened. That's the nature of this work. Blackwood rose with her. And if Obsidian Shield works, then we push the enemy's program back by years. And you'll walk away knowing more than most generals. Frost glanced once toward the street before slipping into the flow of pedestrians. Within seconds she was gone, as if the conversation had never happened. Blackwood stood there a moment longer, the hum of the cafe returning to fill the space she'd left behind. His hand closed around the drive in his pocket. Whatever Obsidian Shield was going to be, it would not be routine. The air in the operations tent smelled faintly of dust, solder, and the chemical tang of cooling electronics. Outside, the desert wind rattled the camouflage netting overhead in restless bursts. Forward monitoring Station K. 12 wasn't much to look at, just a cluster of prefab structures and sensor masts clinging to a rocky rise. But on paper, it was the tip of a very sharp spear. On paper, the mission was simple. Test new electronic countermeasures in a contested zone. In reality, it was bait. Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood stood over the main console, arms folded, while Major Wright, now his XO, gave the status update. Perimeter sensors hot. Defensive positions dug in. We're broadcasting exactly the signal profile outlined in the mission parameters. It's obvious enough for them to detect, subtle enough to make them think we're trying to hide it. Blackwood nodded. Perfect. We want them curious before we want them hostile. Wright's eyes flicked to the far corner of the tent, where a civilian consultant sat hunched over a specialized comms terminal. Dark hair, clean-shaven, thin-rimmed glasses. His ID badge read, Dr. Soren Caldwell, Electromagnetic Field Analysis. He hadn't said much since arrival 2 days ago. Didn't need to. He worked like someone who'd been dropped into a familiar groove, in position and operational. Wright confirmed quietly, only you and I know his real role. Blackwood followed her gaze. Caldwell was typing in measured bursts, eyes scanning readouts that looked like static to everyone else. His hands moved with unhurried precision, each keystroke deliberate. Blackwood had seen that kind of focus before, at Redemption, in a different corner of a different command post. Frost Corner. This time, he knew what to look for. The first week passed in a slow boil of routine. The task force ran overt EW drills, feeding carefully curated signals into the ether. The intent was obvious. Make enough noise for enemy listening posts to get curious, but not so much they became alarmed. On day 5, a reconnaissance drone ghosted across the northern horizon. Its thermal signature was faint, but a long lens caught a brief flash in the sunlight. Confirmation they were being watched. "Let them watch," Blackwood told Wright. Enemy surveillance flights became a regular feature after that. Ground sensors picked up the occasional long-range patrol in the hills. On day 10, someone took a probing shot at one of their relay towers from beyond the perimeter. Missed. Deliberately, Blackwood suspected. "They're measuring us," Wright said during a briefing. "Exactly as planned," he replied. On the evening of day 14, Caldwell approached Blackwood with a data slate. His tone was calm, almost clinical. "Colonel, I've detected an anomalous signal pattern at these coordinates." He pointed to a sector 5 kilometers southeast. "Not ours. It's active surveillance, but the signature doesn't match any known system." Blackwood studied the readout. The pattern was wrong. Too clean, too precise to be civilian, and unlike anything their threat database had logged. "Your recommendation?" "Continue standard operations," Caldwell said, "but adjust our countermeasure profile to this configuration." He showed a new schematic, subtle changes that would mask their awareness of the anomaly while letting him siphon every byte of telemetry produced. "You want them to think they're invisible," Blackwood said. Caldwell's eyes met his. "They'll be more generous with their secrets if they believe no one's watching." The days that followed were a study in slow escalation. Drones lingered longer over their airspace. Perimeter sensors caught the faint crawl of ground teams testing approach vectors. The signal anomaly Caldwell had flagged grew more active, cycling through modes like a predator flexing its claws. "They're building a picture of us," Wright observed during a private meeting. "How we respond, what we prioritize. They're looking for the seam to break." "And we're giving them exactly what they expect to find," Blackwood said. On the morning of day 18, the alarms hit. Multiple penetration attempts detected across secure channels, the comms officer reported. Adaptive algorithms, shifting every few seconds to bypass firewalls. Screens flickered. Comms dropped. Perimeter feeds went dark one by one. Implement emergency protocols. Error in message stream. Retry. The alarm started as a ripple, a single tone from the comm station, then cascaded into a blaring chorus. Panels lit red. Status boards flickered. On the tactical display, the outer perimeter sensors winked out one after another, like a string of lights dying in sequence. "Multiple penetration attempt across all channels," the comms officer shouted. "Adaptive packet reshaping. We can't lock them out. They're shifting every 2 seconds." Static ripped to the command net, drowning Blackwood's voice as he tried to issue fallback orders. The screens over the ops pit went from clean lines and icons to a soup of jagged interference. Somewhere in the distance, a sentry's rifle cracked, a sharp, human punctuation against the electronic chaos. "Sir, we're losing secondary systems. Firewalls are folding. Defensive grid is blind on sectors 3 and 6. Blackwood scanned the room, keeping his voice steady. "Emergency protocols. Shift to hardline backups. Prep for ground assault." No one panicked, but the room carried that taut, brittle focus of people doing math in their heads, counting ammo, counting minutes. And then, through the storm of noise, Major Wright's voice cut in, urgent but controlled. "Sir, Dr. Caldwell is requesting clearance to initiate something called Countermeasure Omega." Blackwood turned toward the man in question. Caldwell's civilian professor demeanor was gone, replaced by a stillness Blackwood recognized from Redemption. Zero horizon posture. "Not in our mission parameters," Blackwood said. "That's correct," Caldwell replied. "Omega wasn't briefed because it requires a live, hostile system to function. You have one. Now." Wright glanced between them. "Sir," Blackwood didn't hesitate. "Approved. Give him whatever he needs." Caldwell's fingers moved in a blur, bypassing the base's crippled network to tie directly into its main communications array. His equipment, sleek, compact, entirely unmarked, hummed with a low resonance that cut under the sound of the alarms. Unlike the rest of the command center, his station didn't flicker, didn't glitch. It was running on something entirely separate. "What exactly is Omega?" Wright asked quietly, watching lines of indecipherable code waterfall across Caldwell's screens. Caldwell didn't look up. Think of it as a mirror. We let them in, let them see what they want to see, while recording everything about how they move. Once we know their every step, we make the floor vanish. The final keystroke landed like a trigger pull. "Colonel," Caldwell said, "you may want to warn your people. What happens next will be disorienting." Blackwood keyed the intercom. "All personnel, brace for systems reset. 3 seconds." The lights died. The hum of servers choked into silence. For 3 long heartbeats, the command center was lit only by the dim emergency strips along the floor. Then the system surged back, not on their original architecture, but something sleeker, sharper. Interfaces Blackwood had never seen before bloomed on the consoles. Smooth and minimal, each stamped with a faint symbol that looked like an eclipse. What the hell? Captain Espinoza, their cyber specialist, was already scanning data feeds. "This isn't our system." "And wait, sir, we're seeing their network." Their network, full topology. On the central display, red nodes spidered outward from a hub, enemy command relays, EW platforms, artillery fire control links. All of it, live, vulnerable. "My God," Wright breathed. "We didn't just block them. We hijacked their architecture." "Not hijacked," Caldwell corrected calmly. "Reflected. We let them deploy their complete suite against us. In doing so, they handed us the operational signature for their entire next-gen system. Every algorithm, every handshake, every vulnerability." As he spoke, the red nodes began to wink out. Not from jamming, but from the enemy's own systems collapsing inward, choking on corrupted protocols. In some sectors, control links looped back on themselves, issuing nonsense orders. Drone feeds showed hostile artillery rotating aimlessly, barrel servos twitching. "They're blind," Espinoza said in awe, "and they don't even know why." For the next hour, it was like watching a skyscraper fall in slow motion. The enemy's EW umbrella didn't just fail, it imploded, taking their coordination with it. Units that had been moving like a single organism now stumbled, tripped over each other, or simply stopped transmitting. Long-range recon teams peeled away, unsure of orders. Air cover evaporated. On the 62nd minute, Caldwell disconnected his device and powered it down. The base's original systems, now fully restored, hummed back to life. "It's done," he said simply. Blackwood called him aside into the small, glass-walled office off the ops floor. Once the door shut, he spoke quietly. "All right, who are you really?" The corner of Caldwell's mouth tugged upward. "Major Elliot Remington, Zero Horizon Special Operations." Dr. Caldwell was a useful skin to wear. "Like Dr. Finch," Blackwood said, "and Technical Specialist Frost." "You've been briefed well," Remington acknowledged. "Operational security prevents me from confirming or denying specific identities, but you understand the principle." Blackwood nodded. "And now, Remington said, "we have their system. Full capture. Analysis will give us at least an 18-month window before they can field a functional upgrade. Containment teams en route to secure the data and hardware. Your unit will get official credit for pioneering a revolutionary countermeasure. Several commendations will be written." "And you?" Blackwood asked. "I disappear. Zero Horizon returns to the dark. But..." Remington reached into his jacket and handed over a sealed envelope. "Command has approved a permanent integrated model. Conventional forces paired with Zero Horizon assets from the outset. You'll be in command." Blackwood accepted the envelope, the weight of it sinking in. "That's a big change in your doctrine." "The battlefield's changing," Remington said. "We adapt, or we become the enemy's training exercise." Outside, the ops floor was already pivoting from crisis mode to controlled debrief. They had no idea the war they just fought was only half the battle, and that the other half had been invisible. 3 months later, the hangar base smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. Lieutenant Colonel Thaddeus Blackwood stood at the head of a briefing room that still carried the faint tang of industrial sealant. Rows of desks faced a large wall screen, displaying the simple, newly minted insignia of Strategic Response Unit Echo. To everyone in the room, it was a conventional counter, electronic warfare formation. To everyone except Blackwood and his executive officer, Major Wright, it was something else entirely. Wright stood off to one side, tablet in hand, scanning the roster. She'd helped handpick most of these officers. Sharp, adaptable, quick on the uptake. All they lacked was the full truth, and they'd never have it. This unit, Blackwood began, his voice steady, exists to meet threats before they mature. You'll test new countermeasures, deploy into contested zones, and make yourself a problem to anyone who thinks they can own the electromagnetic spectrum. His gaze swept the room. You'll also work with attachments, specialists, whose expertise will push you beyond standard doctrine. They won't wear your patch, and they may not answer to your chain of command. Your job will be to make the integration seamless. He left it at that. In this business, the unsaid was often more important than the brief. The door opened quietly. A woman in civilian attire slipped into the back row, her badge marking her as Dr. Lyra Emerson, Systems Integration Specialist. She moved with the unhurried precision of someone who already knew where she belonged. Blackwood kept his expression neutral, but he knew the look in her eyes. Focused, assessing, weighing the room. Another ghost had arrived. He continued without pause. This unit will deploy as a self-contained force, ready to operate independently or in conjunction with allied formations. You will encounter situations where the obvious solution is wrong, where the picture you see is incomplete. When that happens, I expect you to act, not freeze, because hesitation in this field doesn't cost seconds. It costs lives. After the briefing, Wright joined him at the front. "New consultant?" she asked, glancing toward Dr. Emerson, who was quietly unpacking a slim case at the back of the room. Blackwood nodded once. "Zero Horizon. Do we know which cell?" "No," he said, "and we won't until the moment they want us to." Wright studied Emerson for a moment longer. "She's got the same eyes as Frost." "Not the same," Blackwood said quietly, "but the same weight." The rest of the afternoon was spent in drills, testing new frequency hopping patterns, calibrating sensor sweeps, running simulated jamming scenarios. Emerson never drew attention to herself, but when a diagnostic stalled on one of the signal intercept arrays, she was suddenly there, hands moving over controls with a speed that made the technician step back. Within 30 seconds, the system hummed like nothing had ever gone wrong. "Just a permissions mismatch," she said lightly, before fading back into background. Blackwood caught Wright watching her with the same mix of suspicion and respect he'd once had for Frost. They both knew what they were seeing. The real work, wrapped in a cover story. Later, as the room emptied, Blackwood found a small envelope on his desk. Inside was a card, handwritten in precise block letters. Some victories are measured not by what is gained, but by what is prevented. The best commanders understand the value of battles history will never record. No signature, no insignia, just the familiar sense that the world had shifted by a fraction of a degree. As the day wound down, Blackwood stood in the doorway of the operations bay, watching his new unit move with the awkward rhythm of people still learning each other's pace. Soon enough, they'd be in the field, and the rhythm would either harden into steel or crack apart. And somewhere in the shadows, just like at Redemption, just like during Obsidian's Shield, an unseen hand would be shaping the outcome. He thought of Frost's words that day on the ridge. "The war you see is only the part of the picture your clearance lets you look at." He understood them now more than ever. "Ready for this?" Wright asked, stepping up beside him. "No," Blackwood said honestly, "but we'll go anyway." The lights dimmed as the training bay powered down for the night, leaving only the pale glow of status panels, like watchful eyes, scattered across the dark. Somewhere beyond those walls, another battle was already forming. Somewhere, another ghost was already in position.